My name's Patricia Allingham Carlson, and this is my painting I call Path to the Outland. Some paintings are just easier than average to paint, and this was one of them. I began this painting with a random wet bunch of paint on a surface, and I pressed plastic wrap into it while it was wet, weighted it down, and took it off when it was dry. Some really nice textures ensued, and as I looked at the printed surface and the textures, I saw a forest path. Looking through my reference photos, I had just the perfect forest path photograph, and I sketched it onto this blurry background and worked out perfectly. Adding the structure with darks and lights, adding the details to the painting, glazes, building up color, the whole thing came together in a really easy way for me. I hope you enjoy watching it as well, and give it a like if you do. Now let's paint. I started a new painting using a mixture of acrylic paint and watercolor, pressed it out with plastic wrap, and began to sketch. Here I'm using a white Conte crayon. When I squinted my eyes and looked back at it, I got a very clear picture. I used a reference photograph that I had taken from a painting or from a park walk some years back. It showed a nice bend on a path. The forest trees were tall, and the light was very interesting. The colors were nothing like this, but I decided to superimpose my image as a composition on top of this very dreamy colored image. I'm sketching out the composition with watercolor paint. And I'm establishing the sides of the pathway. There were some strong shadows going across the path from the light on the trees. Starting them in across the pathway and then up the sloping hill next to it just seemed to work out right. And then I'm doing some more sketching with a chalk pastel as well. There was some very strong light around a tall tree on the top right-hand side. So I'm marking that in with my white pastel. And I'm beginning to sketch in some of the other trees further back in the scene with watercolor paint. In my photographic reference, there was a big old stump of a large tree on the left side of the path. It gave a striking impression of a big, solid, old object and helped set my composition up in a way that was pleasing to me. I had to use a lot of paint to get that stump as dark as it needed to be, and that took some time. But at this point, I'm still establishing the sides of the path and the trees growing up through the forest in the background. Now this blurry background composition was all set up just by random chance on wet paper, and I really had no idea what it would become. But superimposing an image that seemed to work with it on top of it with my drawing and my painting it in seemed to add a nice random quality. And with some paintings just about paint themselves, and this is one of those. It just came together for me. And the composition I chose worked. So it became a very fun challenge. Getting that stump in the right location with my chalk and then establishing the light source on the right hand side. Coming across the path and hitting the right side of the stump so that the back side is very dark. I'm using a lot of different colors here, and none of them are black. I'm using alizarin crimson, I'm using indigo, and I'm using purple. I'm also using some Hooker's Green Dark. There was some moss growing on the edge of the tree, and the very front of it was quite lit up with light. So the mossy areas are showing as a lighter green there. The rest of the stump was quite dark and almost in silhouette. Here I'm using my white gouache, which is an opaque watercolor, to add light to the painting where I want it to be getting struck by sunlight filtering through the forest. So the media used in this painting so far is watercolor, gouache, white ink, and acrylic ink. At this point, I'm not using any more acrylic, just the white gouache and the plain watercolor paint. I'm adding some dappled areas of pure white in the background where the sunlight is shining through the clumps of trees and leaves. I'm also adding some strong whites on the pathway where there's no shadows, as well as showing on the slopes on the left of the pathway. I found that adding these very horizontal, almost stripes of white going across a path, interspersed with more colorful shadows, adds a very nice effect and draws the eye inward into the painting in a way that almost makes you feel that you're walking down the path. adding a few touches of highlights into the stump where some diffused sunlight might be reaching inward to add a little bit of detail and texture. And I'm darkening the trees in the middle ground, particularly the big, large tree on the right side of the path, which is a dominant part of the composition, along with the stump. There's a large, blotchy red area in the middle of that tree. That was there by random chance when I created the blurry, textured underpainting with plastic wrap. I liked it and I'm leaving it. People who are looking to be more realistic would likely make it into something else or cover it over. But I liked it, and it gave a feeling of mystery, like, what is that red blur? But the excitement of the color red added a nice element to the painting. So if we want to address the mystery of the depths of the forest, the strange patch of red coloring, as well as the red in the background, would add to the mystery. To my eye, the yellow was needed to become more dominant, to balance out the other colors that I'd put down in the background painting. The yellow seems to balance the blues and the purples. And in a complementary color scheme, the yellow and purple do offset each other and add an aspect of excitement to the painting, just like the green and the red do, because of being complementary colors. I'm adding some sparks of unique different colors, some turquoise, some emerald green, and some viridian green, and playing around with an almost rainbow-like effect, such as you might find in a mysterious painting of a path deep into the forest where the colors are so unusual. I guess you could say the painting has a little magical color in it. This is an overlay of leaves coming in front of the brilliant rainbow colors of the forest, to add a bit of detail and a bit of accent. And here I am adding another layer of depth to that big stump. And to my eye, the darkness on the left side of the path balances out the darkness of the rock and the big tall tree on the right side of the path. Since the one is a little closer than the other, it can hopefully lead the eye down the path, which then goes around a bend and disappears. There's some blurry sections where the path disappears around the bend, And I like the feeling of that, which occurred by random chance, but seems to suggest a fog or a mist or something mysterious. Looking at what has developed so far, I begin to wonder, how much more detail should I add to this existing composition? If I add too much detail, it might start to look fussy or overly studied. If I add not enough, it will look unfinished. So the eternal question of how much should I develop it comes along here, and I just start to add some foresty details like branches and eventually some leaves along the path. I begin my details, such as these branches, very pale, and I can bring them out easily to make them darker where needed. And if it looks like they add to the painting. Because the paper had gotten so very wet, as the colors go on, they often just soak right into the paper, and I have to continually darken them. I'm using my reference photo to see which direction the branches grow from the tree. In pine trees, the branches tend to grow out more sideways, whereas in deciduous trees, they tend to grow out more at an angle, a 45-degree angle. I'm darkening the path and the shadows on the path. I'm adding purples and I'm adding mauve. Another color I'm using rather prominently in the path is burnt sienna, as well as a color called Indian red. Along with the purple, they seem to create an interesting color combination that I find rather exciting to paint. And where I add a color, I will almost always put it in a different section of the composition as well, so it's not an isolated color in only one spot on the whole paper. I feel this leads the eye around the composition. I'm trying to develop the path in the foreground to draw the viewer in with rich colors and some varied textures. Adding some more whites. This is the gouache, which is an opaque white, into the middle ground around the large tree to make it stand out more. And then there's an undeveloped area behind the tree stump that I will first add some lights to, and then I'll add some color and texture to make it blend into the rest of the painting and the rest of the forest feeling. Here I've mixed some yellow into the white gouache to make an opaque yellow. And that's the sunlight I'm trying to diffuse through the branches and the leaves of the forest. And so the painting is building up, layer by layer by layer. And there are many layers going on here. But since the beginning layer had so many wonderful textures and colors, strictly by chance, this painting is coming together much faster than many other ones that I do. Between the colors and texture that were presented by random chance and the composition I'm superimposing onto this blurry under image, with the composition seeming to closely follow what was actually already there by chance, the painting is becoming integrated and more whole in a way that was easier than most to approach. Sometimes you just luck out, in other words. And this was one of those paintings. When a painting is easy and comes together, that's a bit of a blessing. As I'm mixing colors here for this very dark tree, I'm not using black still. I'm using mixtures of indigo, some Van Dyke brown, and purple. I also use a color called Payne's Gray. Payne's Gray is a lovely, rich, bluish gray, but it does tend to fade out into a much lighter color. So we have to add a lot of layers of Payne's Gray if you're using it. In that case, I was just covering up one side and then the other to see where some development was needed for the painting. Getting out a little bit more yellow, because I wanted to take the yellow that was in the top part of the painting and bring it down into the forest floor to show where some sunlight was striking, and just to balance out the yellow a little bit better. And can you see how it made that side of the path light up a bit? If you think a color is right and you add it and it doesn't look right, well, you can always take it off again if you work quickly and with your paper towel and your damp brush. I'm darkening some of the branches that are in the middle ground tree. Because I want to develop that section of the painting a little bit more. The front part of the painting has become very well developed. So my eye goes to the middle ground to try to bring that out a little bit more. Again, I'm evaluating what needs to be added where. In this case, my eye said add some more whites to the path, especially on the right side, in the foreground. A little more light around the tree to make the dark tree stand out. In my photograph, there was a lot of leaf debris laying along the path. So I've decided to add some of those leaves and the leaf textures into the foreground sides of the path. I'm using some warm colors and placing warm colors like yellows, oranges, reds up in the front of the painting can tend to add the good feeling of depth, because we see color close up much more brightly and warmly than we do color as it goes back into the atmosphere and gets more blued and grayed out. Adding the warm colors here also integrates the foreground of the painting with the background, and which has those warm yellows and reds and oranges. And here comes another layer of dark for the tree, which just keeps getting lighter when it dries. And I add another tree growing up around the stump. As well as darkening one that's already there. Darkening some of the rocks in the foreground or the middle ground and the sides of the path. Getting toward the end of this painting, where it really appears to my eye to be coming together, looking much more finished, completed, and I don't want to overdo it, but adding just the right amount of detail is the judgment call. And here I've decided to add some dark silhouettes of foliage against those strong brights in the background. You'll see these dark clumps of foliage that I'm adding fade as they dry, and I have to go back and add them several times over with some layers or glazes. I'm trying to keep these random and light so that the colors will shine through them. I don't want big heavy clumps. I want them to feel light, like the floaty leaves and atmosphere in a forest, a deep, mysterious forest. So you've noticed the third or fourth layer of darks going on. And I put it aside to get a better point of view, and then do my cover up once more. Adding some final layers of bright white gouache accent. And then I do some splatter painting with some yellow to add some unexpected yellow splatters in a random manner. And if randomly they fall where they don't look good, I just block them off. It's done. I'm going to sign it and call it done. This one was a pleasure and an easy one to do. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed seeing me paint Path to the Outland. You'll see links below to click on to like my video, subscribe, ring the bell to get future video notices, and you could check out the products I use. You could find my Facebook art page link and my blog link there below too. I'd also appreciate your comments. I'll see you next video.